no one ever likes being regulated. No one ever likes particularly being asked that they should pay more into a system. Clearly, streamers would have preferred not to have base contributions, much less the requirements today.
Duh. With all the crazy things that happened this week, there was one that may have taken the cake, but not for obvious reasons. Many of you may have actually heard about this story. Many of you may not, but it has to do with the CRTC and Bill C-11. Now, up to now, the CRTC hasn't implemented anything yet. What they've been doing is, well, doing what government does, taking a very, very long time to do anything. That's to our benefit. And they announced this. CRTC says streamers must pay 3 times as much for Canadian content.
The Canadian Radio, Television and Telecommunications Commission, or the CRTC, issued a new decision requiring digital streaming giants to pay 3 times as much of their Canadian revenue to domestic content as before, as the United States continues to mark the Online Streaming Act as a trade irritant. Digital streaming giants, including American companies like Netflix or Disney, were previously required to contribute 5%. No money has been collected yet, however, as a number of streaming companies are fighting the decision in court. Thursday's decision by the CRTC sees that 5% jump to 15%. The Online Streaming Act was the first major reform of the Broadcasting Act and has been repeatedly noted as a trade irritant by the Trump administration. A Republican congressman introduced a bill looking to investigate whether it discriminates against or burdens American commerce in March. Quote, "We're not involved in trade negotiations. We are not in touch with the government about the status of trade negotiations. We're applying Canadian law in Canada," end quote, said Scott Shortliff, CRTC Vice President of Broadcasting. Quote, "We believe that the new requirements will be respected by these companies. Whether they choose to challenge them through any of the measures that are available in Canadian law is, of course, totally up to them," end quote.
Okay, so you're tripling the amount that you want these companies to pay. So let's just lay it out here, folks. Disney, Netflix, Amazon, everybody in between, Paramount. It's kind of the same. So a couple of years ago, the CRTC said you have to pay 5% of your annual profits in Canada to Canadian media because, you know, our Canadian media companies can't manage their business properly. And they didn't like that. They didn't like it so much that they actually took it to court. But we'll get to that in a minute. And these guys are saying, well, we're going to triple it, and we believe that they're going to pay it. But on the chance that they don't, then they have the option of challenging it in court. How can you say that we believe that they're going to respect it and pay it, while also saying, but, you know, we'll probably see them in court because we expect them not to want to do that? This is the insanity that's going on here, folks. This is the court story. So this actually happened in December of 2024. So streamers like Netflix, Disney Plus get court reprieve from paying for Canadian content. Global platforms challenging decision ordering them to pay 5% of Canadian revenues.
The Federal Court of Appeal says big streaming companies won't have to pay for Canadian content until it hears their appeal of a CRTC decision ordering them to pay. In June, the Canadian Radio, Television and Telecommunications Commission said foreign streamers must contribute 5% of their annual Canadian revenues to a fund devoted to producing domestic content, including local TV and radio news. Big global streamers like Netflix and Disney Plus launched court challenges of that order, which the regulator made under the Online Streaming Act. Earlier this month, the Federal Court of Appeal agreed to hear the case. A judge said Monday the streamers won't have to make the payments, estimated to be at least $1.25 million each annually, until that court process plays out. The parties have agreed to an expedited schedule, meaning the court hearing would take place in June before the bulk of the money is due in August.
Can everyone see why this is going to be a problem? Just say it. Because you have these mega giants, and they're just trying to do business in Canada. And the government is saying, hey, you want to do business here? It's going to cost you, man. It's going to cost you a lot. And, you know, some may say, well, you know, the fee is only 5%. But it's only 5% of the Canadian audience.
Right.
Right.
And that's an important distinction. It's not 5% of their total revenues. It's only 5% of their revenue from Canadians.
So you can probably see where this is a concern and where this is going. But let's just, let's start here.
American streaming giants like Netflix, Disney, and Amazon Prime now being ordered to spend more money in Canada, whether they want to or not.
No one ever likes being regulated. No one ever likes particularly being asked that they should pay more into a system. Clearly, streamers would have preferred not to have base contributions, much less the requirements today.
The CRTC says to ease the burden on Canadian broadcasters, it's demanding big streaming platforms contribute 15% of their annual Canadian revenue to support Canadian content.
Most of the rest of the European Union are in the single digits when it comes to these kinds of requirements. And so Canada, with this decision, becomes really one of the most expensive jurisdictions for streamers to operate in.
The big American streaming platforms are already in federal court challenging the 5% levy the CRTC imposed in 2024.
The escalation from 5% to 15% is seen as an additional trade escalation.
Industry watchers in the U.S. call the Canadian measures discriminatory and say consumers will ultimately pay the price.
Obviously.
Well, I was going to say, isn't that the way it always is?
So this is going to be the crazy thing, folks. So the government says to these streamers, we're going to triple the amount that you actually have to pay us. Now, these streamers are going to say, well, we're not going to be taking that out of our bottom line. So to offset that, guess what's going to happen?
Canadian consumers are going to be charged more.
They're going to increase the streaming fees. And then who gets all the backlash? The U.S. streaming companies. Because as far as the average Canadian sees this, it's just the streamers that are raising these fees. Because the CRTC isn't putting out this, like, you know, big press release.
Well, and legacy media isn't really getting to the bottom of it either because they benefit from this.
And how rich is it, that guy on the CRTC, to sit there and say, well, you know, people don't like being regulated, and, you know, these companies don't like, contributing, and they don't like their contributions being raised. Duh. That's like saying, well, people don't like being taxed, and people don't like being censored. Hello? Welcome to the party. Like, how insulated and how much of a bubble are you living in? And why are you doing this right now?
Well, because media, like, look at CBC, they're getting, what was it, $1.4 billion, and they're still on the decline. I mean, you found all those documents, and they were saying, like, yeah, our revenues are bad.
Yeah, CBC is tanking.
Yeah.
But this is Carney's own government that is doing this in the middle of what Carney is trying to tell everybody is a trade war. So why are you trying to do this? Because this is, if you actually look at this, it depends on how the court actually defines what the CRTC is trying to impose. Because if the court actually defines this as a digital services tax, then that's against the CUSMA agreement. CUSMA agreement. But it's actually violating CUSMA again. And this goes back to, yeah, you know, the US throwing tariffs on us. I think that's stupid. I think that's bad for Canada. But when Canadians do this and you penalize these tech companies for actually doing business in Canada, it's free market. And as they said, Carney's own buddies in the European Union, they're not charging the US what Canada is charging.
Well, because to me, and again, this is my opinion, I don't have, proper research into this, but it seems like all these Canadian broadcasters came together and said, hey guys, we're not making enough money. How can we get more money?
Right. And as the world gets smaller, competition gets more fierce because competition gets closer to home.
Well, and the other thing, if these channels like CBC made good Canadian content, Canadians would watch it. But they don't make good content.
Right.
I mean, look at this fiasco with this quote unquote prank show. Right?
Now, we wanted to hear let me prove it. We didn't want to hear, but we needed to hear from the horse's mouth if possible. So here is a short clip of the spokesperson for the CRTC talking about this.
This is literally completely overhauling decades old regulatory frameworks. So frameworks that have been in place forever. There are a lot of separate issues and tricky issues, as I said. Honestly, like support for English and French markets totally different. Contributions of online streamers and what that should look like, and how do we incentivize and how do we have flexibility around that. A lot of issues to cover, and having heard from so many different interveners with wildly different views on all of these issues, we've taken an approach where we're trying to deal with issues almost on a progressive basis. So like, let's get this out. So we worked super fast to get out base contributions. Let's get money into the system. We know that needs to happen quickly. And so we did that. And then, moved to Canadian content, got the definition out. And so we just keep building on that and try to get things out as we can. It's the complexity of the issues themselves and the significantly different views that we have on the public record. It's been an intense process is what I would say.
So they're moving at a snail's pace, thankfully, and but we actually found where they're actually going through this process and where they're updating, and it's kind of nice to actually see what's going on. So let's just take you through a little bit of this. We're not going to be reading line by line because
it's a lot.
It's a lot. Everyone will fall asleep and probably unsubscribe. Because this is not the Northern CRTC perspective. But here's the website. So this is the CRTC, and this is their plan to modernize Canada's broadcasting framework. So you can see what is coming up in the fall of 2026. So they're consulting, and they're consulting. And in winter 2026, they're consulting again. They're consulting in 2026, 2027, just so everybody feels a lot better about what they're going to be discussing and spending our taxpayer dollars on. Consulting on diversity, equity, and inclusion. Isn't that nice? But here's some things that they have done, and there's a long list here. And to just summarize it, they haven't done anything yet. Like, nothing is implemented. Everything has just been on consulting. So they're consulting. Next deliverable, a sustainable broadcasting system. So again, you can see virtually everything is consulting. And then they have the Independent Local News Fund. So that's where they're making this recommendation, as well as the into the Canadian Media Fund that incorporates this 5% deal. Now, on one of these, we actually looked at the decision, and it was it was based on discoverability. Now, this has to do with the concerns of everybody about independent media and the algorithm taking over and all of this. But to summarize it, this is the pertinent part about this. So it says, for the sake of clarity, users that upload content on social media platforms are not, and I repeat, not subject to the Broadcasting Act, and therefore will not need to comply with these conditions of service. The good news is independent media creators like Northern Perspective, we are users. We are not said platforms. Now, will the CRTC at some point decide to change the algorithm for discoverability? Don't know yet.
Maybe.
We don't know.
Well, those documents that we found from CBC had said, CBC should be displayed prominently.
Right.
And in order to do that, you have to change the algorithm.
So it's possible.
It's possible.
But as far as everything that has been announced so far, the good news is nothing has happened yet. So those consultations will continue, and even this 15%, it hasn't even been formally mandated yet. They've just announced that they're going to announce it.
Yeah.
So that's a good thing.
Well, and we've been getting some emails and some comments and some concerned viewers that Northern Perspective viewership is down and that it's due to C11. The good news is it's not due to C11 because they haven't implemented it yet. They have not implemented any algorithm changes on YouTube. Honestly, what I suspect is that viewership usually does go down this time of year because the weather's nice. People don't want to be stuck inside watching YouTube. And the other thing, I think a lot of people are just getting very fatigued from politics.
Well, and I wouldn't say that, well, when you say they're not changing the algorithm, the CRTC isn't changing the algorithm yet.
YouTube does whatever it wants, whenever it wants. But
what I can say is the YouTube algorithm is changing constantly. And it's always a pain. Every couple of months, there's this, dip in the way that YouTube treats at least our channel, and then it kind of normalizes again. So, we're in a relatively normal period right now. They're down like a little bit, but
again, it's the weather's getting nicer, right?
Yeah.
People are going outside, they're going hiking, they're going camping, they're doing all sorts of fun stuff. They're not, sitting in their homes in the winter watching YouTube.
So fingers crossed the CRTC doesn't go down that path. But the big concern about this is it may actually slap Carney in the face and be a very rude awakening when it comes to these trade negotiations. And this is what Pierre Poilievre had to say about this.
Well, I'm coming out against the Liberal government making consumers pay more because, let's be clear, this will be a consumer tax. It will all be passed on. Let's not be naive and pretend that the web giants or the streamers are just going to absorb it. Of course, they're going to make Canadians pay more. And Canadians will get absolutely nothing in return for this Liberal tax hike. The federal government of Mark Carney has the ability to not only get rid of this proposed tax increase, but also to get rid of the Netflix tax altogether. You'll recall Liberals put hand on heart and promised there would never be a Netflix tax. And of course, they broke that promise, and Canadians are paying the price. Our people are far overtaxed already. They can't afford to eat, heat, or house themselves. For God's sakes, let people come home and relax and enjoy their favorite binge-watching experience without paying yet another Liberal tax hike.
Well, and he's right. Canadians are not going to get anything out of this deal. What are we going to get? More shows and more news that we didn't ask for, that nobody watches, right?
Pretty much. And this is the issue. And this is where the Liberal seniors may actually finally see some negative to Mark Carney, because a lot of seniors are watching all their stuff on smart TVs now, and they're watching Netflix and they're watching some of the stuff because it's easy, right? So when they get notices that this is going up, and I really hope that if and when this does happen, that these providers say, as a result of your government's policy, we're having to increase your bill. I'm hoping they see that and they say, wait a minute, what do you mean my government's policy? Mark Carney made my stuff more expensive? But he's a genius. He's an economist. That's not supposed to happen. CBC told me so. So
yeah, because CBC is benefiting.
So it's like these little things that are going to stack on top of each other that are going to make it, problematic for Mark Carney. And this is, again, sometimes what happens when you write this legislation, but then you write it in such a way that a body can then make its own decision on it. And now it's somewhat out of your control. You can't say, well, it wasn't my fault. Well, you wrote the legislation and it's your government body. So tell me another one.
Well, it's weird to me that, they can write this legislation, Bill C11, and then the CRTC can set the tax rate. That's crazy. Like, I know that's how it works, but it just seems wrong.
Yep.
Because again, taxation without representation, because you know that tax is getting passed on to the consumer.
Imagine this goes the other way. That these streaming services say, you know what? It's too expensive to do business in Canada. We're pulling out. Can you imagine what would happen if Netflix, Paramount Plus, Disney Plus, Amazon Prime, all of them just said, you know what? It's not worth it. Not worth it anymore. And then they just geo-block Canada. Can you imagine?
Everybody's going to be getting a VPN.
Well, everyone's going to be losing their mind, and
That
rightly
too.
so. Everyone's going to be saying, what the heck?
Well, and again, like Pierre said, this has no benefit to Canadian citizens whatsoever.
So I don't think that's going to happen, but this is the interesting thing with all this legislation that's coming in by the Liberals, and you have more and more companies saying, you know what, why bother investing in Canada? Yet he seems to think there's going to be $1 trillion of investment coming in from somewhere. I don't think so. I don't think so at all. So this is what we're dealing with Mr. Carney, and he not only he has to worry about 14 Liberals that are in his caucus that, you know, are they going to leave? Some are going to leave probably. I'm pretty sure at least 2 of those people that are on that letter are Stephen Guilbeault and Jonathan Wilkinson. So there's 2.
Well, we know Wilkinson is leaving for
Yeah.
sure. We speculate
so that's that.
What's his name? Guilbeault was going to be leaving.
He has to deal with this business with the CPC and the APTN and the quote-unquote prank show, because now he has all the police organizations starting to line up against him. So that's a problem. And now he has the CRTC coming out and saying, oh, well, you know, we're going to make it 3 times as hard to actually get streaming services in Canada. And all of this going into CUSMA. So this has been a pretty bad week for Mr. Carney. And you know what? Looks good on him. Really does. And I hope that this type of negative issue that is going on in Canada, this is what's going to keep nudging these swing voters to realize what exactly is going on. And Mark Carney can blame everybody that he wants, but he wanted to be the guy in the big chair, so he has to understand that the buck stops with him.